The egg is not much to look at first. It lies half buried in stone, its surface dulled by mineral, its curve broken by cracks that have crossed it for more time than any living forest has existed. Around it, other shapes press out of the rock in a loose pattern, not bones, not footprints, but something more private. A clutch, a place where an animal once lowered its body to the ground and left the beginning of another life behind. The rock around the eggs may once have been sand, or river mud, or the damp floor of a nesting ground. It may have been warm when the eggs were laid. It may have held the smell of wet plants, crushed fern stems, and the faint rot of leaves. Long before anyone would call them dinosaurs, long before a museum case, long before the word fossil, there was only a parent, a body, a nest, and the fragile problem of bringing the next generation into a dangerous world. A dinosaur egg is easy to misunderstand because it feels familiar. You know what an egg is. You have held one in your hand. You know the thin shell, the weight, the smoothness, the way something so ordinary can still contain a complete animal folded inside it. But a fossil dinosaur egg asks for a slower kind of attention. It is not only a container, it is a record of breathing through shell, of warmth passing through sediment, of minerals drawn from an adult body and shaped into protection. As far as the evidence shows, all dinosaurs reproduced by laying eggs. That includes the extinct dinosaurs of the Mesozoic and the living dinosaurs that survived into the present as birds. The fact sounds simple, almost too simple, but it changes how the dinosaur age has to be imagined. Every giant sauropod, every horned ceratopsian, every armored ankylosaur, every tyrannosaur, every small feathered hunter began as a body small enough to fit inside a shell. The largest animals ever to walk on land did not begin with thunder. They began with stillness. A body grew in a closed space, fed by yolk, held in darkness, surrounded by pores that allowed gases to move in and out. The distance between a hatchling and an adult titanosaur was not only a matter of size, it was a journey through danger, growth, weather, food, predators, sickness, and chance. Most young animals in deep time never reached the size their skeletons promised. If these hidden worlds of the dinosaur age are what bring you back to Jurassical, subscribing keeps the next journey close. The subject of dinosaur families is difficult because behavior rarely fossilizes. Bones can tell us shape. Teeth can tell us diet. Trackways can tell us movement. Eggshell can tell us structure, chemistry, and sometimes temperature. But care, fear, hunger, patience, and instinct usually vanish with the animal. A parent standing beside a nest leaves no expression in the stone. A baby calling from inside an egg leaves no sound. Still, the record is not empty. It has preserved nests packed with eggs. It has preserved broken shell under tiny bones. It has preserved embryos curled in positions they never escaped. It has preserved adults crouched over clutches, their arms spread, their bodies arranged over eggs in a posture that looks startlingly close to brooding. These fossils do not let us see dinosaur family life in full, but they open narrow windows into it. One of those windows begins in a place that looked almost lifeless to the people who crossed it. The flaming cliffs of Mongolia rise in red sandstone under a hard sky. Today they are famous for dinosaurs, but in the early 20th century they were part of a vast, dry landscape where wind-carved cliffs and dust collected in the clothing of expedition crews. In 1923, eggs found there changed what paleontologists could say with certainty. Before that discovery, scientists could infer that dinosaurs laid eggs because dinosaurs were reptiles in the broad sense, and reptiles generally reproduce that way. But inference is not the same as holding the evidence. At the flaming cliffs, the shells were no longer only an expectation. They were physical. They could be photographed, prepared, packed, argued over, and placed in front of the public. Dinosaur reproduction had moved out of speculation and into stone. At first, Those eggs were assigned to Protoceratops, a small horned dinosaur that was common in the same beds. The idea made sense at the time. Eggs are rarely found with the animal that laid them, and the most abundant skeleton nearby can seem like the most reasonable parent. But paleontology often advances by correcting its own reasonable mistakes. Decades later, similar eggs revealed an embryo of an oviraptorosaur inside them. The supposed thief of eggs was not only near the nest, it may have been the parent. The name oviraptor means egg thief, and it carries the older interpretation inside it, like a fossil inside language. A small theropod was found near eggs and was imagined stealing from another dinosaur's nest. The evidence later turned in a different direction. Oviraptorids were not simply raiders at the edge of a breeding ground. In some cases, they were animals arranged over their own clutches, caught in postures that suggest care, protection, and incubation. That reversal matters because it changes the emotional shape of the fossil without requiring sentimentality. The bones do not become gentle in a human sense. The animal does not become a parent in the way a person is a parent. But the fossil stops being a scene of theft and becomes a scene of reproduction. The adult is no longer only a predator. It is part of a nesting system, part of a life cycle that included eggs, embryos, hatchlings, and the survival of young. To understand those eggs, you have to think about the shell itself. Dinosaur eggshell was not just a hard wall. It was a living interface, produced by the adult, shaped by evolution, and built to solve several problems at once. It needed to protect the embryo from crushing. It needed to hold moisture without sealing the embryo away from air. It needed to allow oxygen to enter and carbon dioxide to leave. It had to be strong enough to survive outside the body, but weak enough to break from the inside. The shell records some of these compromises in microscopic detail. Under magnification, fossil eggshell can show layers, crystal structures, and pores. The number and size of those pores matter. More porous eggs suggest different nesting conditions than less porous ones. Eggs buried in sediment, vegetation, or mound material often need more pore space because gas has to move through a surrounding medium. Eggs incubated in open nests can manage different balances. A nest, then, is not just a place where eggs are placed. It is part of the reproductive system. Sand can hold heat. Rotting vegetation can produce warmth. Damp sediment can maintain humidity. A shallow scrape in open ground can expose eggs to sun and air. Different dinosaurs likely used different strategies, and the fossil record does not support one single model for all of them. Some probably buried eggs. Some left them partially exposed. Some sat near or over them. Some may have returned often. Others may have laid and moved on. The difference matters because dinosaurs were not one animal. They were a vast group spread across more than 160 million years, across deserts, floodplains, forests, coastlines, polar regions, volcanic landscapes, and inland basins. A sauropod laying dozens of eggs on a Cretaceous floodplain was not facing the same problem as a small feathered theropod arranging elongated eggs in a ring. A duck-billed dinosaur in a nesting colony was not the same as a solitary carnivore using a sandy bank. The egg forces the dinosaur age down to a scale smaller than the skeletons in museum halls. We are used to measuring dinosaurs by femurs, skulls, teeth, claws, tail clubs, horns, and footprints wide enough for a person to sit in. Eggs ask different questions. How warm was the ground? How close were the nests? How long did the embryos develop? Did the adults stay? Did hatchlings walk immediately? Did they wait in the nest, growing while parents brought food? There are limits to what an egg can become. People sometimes imagine that the biggest dinosaurs laid enormous eggs the size of barrels, eggs proportionate to their bodies. But eggs cannot simply scale upward forever. A bigger egg needs a thicker shell, and a thicker shell makes breathing more difficult for the embryo inside. Even the largest dinosaurs laid eggs that were surprisingly small compared with the adult body. The beginning of a giant was not gigantic. This means a newly hatched sauropod was vulnerable in a way the adult was not. An adult might have weighed tens of tons. A hatchling could be small enough to be killed by predators that would never approach a grown animal. Its bones were still developing. Its muscles were new. Its skin was soft compared with the armored confidence of adulthood. It had to eat, grow, avoid being trampled, avoid being found, and survive a world that had no special patience for babies. The Mesozoic was not cruel in a moral sense. It was simply full of living things trying to continue. Eggs were food for some animals. Hatchlings were food for others. Floods could drown a nest before any predator reached it. Drought could bake a clutch in hardening mud. A storm could bury a breeding ground under sediment quickly enough to preserve it for us, but only because it ended the lives or the possibilities held there. The same disasters that destroyed nests could also make them visible to science. A clutch left on an ordinary surface would decay, scatter, or be eaten. Shell would break. Bones would be carried away. Rain would erase the shallow depression. Roots would disturb it. But if mud covered the eggs, or wind-driven sand sealed them, or volcanic ash settled over a nesting ground, the scene might enter the fossil record. Preservation is not a gentle act. It is often a form of interruption. That is why dinosaur eggs are rare compared with dinosaur bones, and dinosaur embryos are rarer still. A skeleton is already mineralized to a degree during life. Bones have density. They have a better chance than soft tissue. Embryonic bones are tiny, delicate, and easily destroyed. The shell may survive while the body inside disappears. Or the embryo may remain, but only as fragile fragments that require extraordinary preparation and interpretation. When an embryo is preserved, the distance between the Mesozoic and the present seems to narrow. A dinosaur no longer appears only as an adult skeleton reconstructed from separate bones. It appears as an unfinished animal, folded into itself, head drawn close, limbs tucked, vertebrae arranged in the last position it held before the egg became a tomb. The fossil is not dramatic. It is small. That is part of its power. Some embryos have shown how much dinosaurs shared with birds, not because birds resemble dinosaurs by coincidence, but because birds are dinosaurs. In one famous oviraptorid embryo from southern China, the body is preserved inside an elongated egg in a curled position that researchers compared with behaviors seen in modern bird embryos before hatching. It does not mean every dinosaur embryo prepared for hatching in exactly the same way, but it strengthens the link between non-avian theropods and the avian world that survived them. A living bird turning inside an egg is a modern act with ancient roots. The movement is brief, hidden, and easy to overlook. Yet in the right fossil, deep time preserves the same kind of posture. The shell becomes a bridge between a vanished theropod on a Cretaceous nesting ground and a chick working its way toward daylight in the present. One belongs to stone. One belongs to morning. The relationship between them is not symbolic. It is evolutionary. The first dinosaur egg ever laid is not known. The earliest known dinosaur eggs and nesting sites push far back into the Triassic, close to the early chapters of dinosaur history. Among the important discoveries are nests and embryos associated with Mesospondylus, an early sauropodomorph from southern Africa. These animals lived long before the classic giants of the Jurassic, before Diplodocus and Brachiosaurus, before the Cretaceous nesting colonies that would later become famous. Mesospondylus was not yet a giant in the later sauropod sense. It belonged to a lineage moving toward that body plan, and its eggs offer a view of reproduction before dinosaur gigantism reached its most extreme forms. The clutches, the embryos, and the repeated use of nesting ground suggest that some dinosaur reproductive behaviors had deep roots. Even early in their history, dinosaurs were not only spreading across landscapes, they were returning to places, laying eggs, and beginning cycles that would continue for millions of years. A nesting ground is a different kind of fossil site from a bone bed. A bone bed can be a place of death, a river trap, a drought assemblage, or a flood deposit. A nesting ground begins with life. It records selection. The adult animal, or animals, chose a surface. They may have tested soil, temperature, drainage, or exposure in ways we can only infer. The eggs were arranged, covered, guarded, abandoned, or revisited according to instincts shaped by countless generations before them. Imagine a floodplain in the late Cretaceous after a seasonal rain. The river has withdrawn into its channel, leaving damp flats beyond the bank. Low plants crowd the wetter edges. Conifers and flowering shrubs grow farther back, depending on the place and time. Insects move over the mud. Small tracks cross the surface before they dry. Somewhere on slightly raised ground, where water is less likely to pool, a dinosaur begins to prepare a nest. It may not look like a bird nest. There may be no woven twigs, no cup in a branch, no neat structure lifted above the ground. Many dinosaur nests were ground nests. Some were scrapes. Some were pits. Some were mounds. Some may have been little more than a prepared patch of sediment where eggs could be positioned and covered. The architecture was shaped by body size, limb anatomy, climate, egg shape, shell porosity, and the danger of crushing the clutch. Egg shape varied. Some dinosaur eggs were rounder, some were elongated, almost torpedo-like. Some clutches were laid in pairs, suggesting the reproductive anatomy of the female and the sequence in which eggs emerged. Oviraptorosaur eggs, in particular, often appear arranged in rings or paired arcs, with the eggs angled outward. That arrangement may have allowed an adult to brood near the center without placing its full body weight directly on every egg. The nest becomes engineering. A large animal cannot simply sit like a small bird if the eggs below it would break. The center of the clutch, the spacing between eggs, the partial burial of the shell, and the posture of the adult all become part of the same solution. In small species, closer contact may have been possible. In larger species, the adult may have shaded, guarded, warmed, or influenced the nest without covering it in the same way a songbird covers eggs. The fossil record gives strong evidence for brooding in some theropods, especially Oviraptorosaurs and Troodontids. Adults preserved over nests are among the closest things paleontology has to a behavioral photograph. But even there, caution is needed. The adult could have been incubating. It could have been guarding. It could have been trapped during a storm while near the eggs. Most likely, in many cases, the behavior involved more than one function at once. Care in animals is rarely pure. A bird sitting on eggs is warming them, protecting them, hiding them, and maintaining conditions for development. A crocodilian guarding a nest is protecting the buried clutch and later helping hatchlings reach water. A dinosaur near eggs may have been managing temperature, discouraging predators, shading the clutch, or simply remaining near reproductive investment too valuable to abandon completely. The fossil captures the posture. The full behavior remains partly outside the frame. This uncertainty does not make the evidence weaker. It makes it more honest. Dinosaur family life was not a single story. It was a range of strategies, some closer to birds, some closer to reptiles, some unlike either in detail. The Mesozoic was large enough to hold many answers at once. A nest in Mongolia, a colony in Montana, a sauropod nesting ground in India. And embryos in China do not need to tell the same story to be part of the same larger history. In Montana, a different kind of evidence came from the Two Medicine Formation, where nests, eggshell, hatchlings, juveniles, and adults of duck-billed dinosaurs helped shape one of the most famous ideas in dinosaur parenting. The animal named Maiasaura became linked with the phrase good mother lizard because its fossils seemed to show more than egg-laying. They suggested colonies, repeated nesting, and young that may have remained in or near the nest after hatching. The interpretation has been debated, refined, and tested over time, as scientific ideas should be. Broken eggshell in nests, the condition of young bones, the spacing of nests, and the presence of different growth stages all contributed to the picture. Some paleontologists have argued that the hatchlings were not immediately independent and may have relied on adults for food or protection. Others have urged caution. because a nesting colony does not automatically prove intensive care. The strength of Maiasaura is not that it gives one perfect answer, it is that it gives a population. A single fossil can be extraordinary, but a nesting ground can show patterns. Nest spacing, clutch arrangement, growth stages, the repeated presence of adults and young in one landscape. It turns dinosaur reproduction from an isolated object into an ecosystem event, something that happened not once, but season after season, on ground that animals return to as living herds. A Maiasaura nesting colony would not have been quiet. Large adults moved across open ground, their feet pressed into damp sediment. Vegetation was torn, trampled, gathered, or eaten. Hatchlings shifted in nests. Juveniles moved at the edges. Predators watched from cover or crossed the colony after dark. Insects fed on waste and plants. The smell would have been strong, the way living colonies are strong, full of heat, dung, broken plants, wet soil, and bodies. A breeding ground concentrates life, and that concentration brings danger. Modern nesting colonies can overwhelm predators by numbers, but they also attract them. Eggs cannot run. Hatchlings cannot defend themselves well. A colony may reduce risk for each individual by placing many nests together, but it also announces to the landscape that food is present. For a dinosaur, reproduction was not a peaceful chapter separate from survival. It was survival made more vulnerable. The babies themselves are among the most revealing parts of the record. Juvenile bones are not only smaller versions of adult bones, they can show different proportions, different textures, different growth rates, and different stages of development. A young dinosaur might have a shorter snout, larger eyes relative to skull size, less developed ornamentation, or limb proportions that changed as it grew. Ontogeny, the process of growth from embryo to adult, is written into bone. Paleontologists study thin sections of fossil bone under microscopes to read growth patterns. The internal structure can reveal rapid growth, pauses, remodeling, and the pace at which an animal approached adult size. Dinosaur babies were not simply waiting to become museum skeletons. Their bodies were changing quickly, responding to food, season, stress, and inherited developmental programs. Some species grew astonishingly fast, others took longer. Some may have passed through juvenile stages that looked different enough to confuse early classifications. That has happened more than once in dinosaur science. A skull from a young animal can be mistaken for a separate species if growth is not understood. Horns, crests, domes, and frills can change dramatically with age. So can limb proportions and bone texture. Family life, in this sense, is not only about care, it is also about recognizing that dinosaurs lived through childhoods, adolescent phases, sexual maturity, and old age. The fossil record often favors adults because larger bones are more likely to survive discovery. Juveniles are fragile. Embryos are more fragile still. But when young dinosaurs are found, they bring the animal back into time. An adult skeleton can seem final, as if the creature arrived in the world already complete. A hatchling reminds us that every lineage passed through smallness. Every giant had a beginning that could have been stepped on, washed away, chilled, starved, or eaten. In an egg, growth happens without sunlight. The embryo does not know the forest, the riverbank, or the adult bodies moving above it. It knows warmth, pressure, chemical exchange, and the slow use of stored food. The yolk is not a symbol of life. It is fuel. Blood vessels spread through membranes. The skeleton begins as cartilage, then hardens. The head takes shape. The limbs fold. A creature that may one day walk under conifers begins in a space no larger than the shell permits. For a dinosaur embryo, the shell had to allow breath before lungs were fully tested by open air. Oxygen moved inward through pores. Carbon dioxide moved outward. Moisture could be lost if conditions were wrong. Too dry, and the embryo could dehydrate. Too wet, and gas exchange could fail. This is one reason nest environment matters so much. The egg was not isolated from the world. It was exposed to the ground, to temperature, to humidity, to the chemistry of sediment, and to the behavior of the adult. Modern birds help us understand some of this, but they cannot be used as simple copies. Birds are living dinosaurs, yet they are also specialized survivors with their own long evolutionary history. Crocodilians help in other ways because they are the closest living relatives of dinosaurs outside birds. Between birds and crocodilians, scientists can compare brooding, buried nests, open nests, parental guarding, vocal hatchlings, and the relationship between eggshell porosity and incubation environment. But extinct dinosaurs still have to be interpreted on their own evidence. Crocodilians bury eggs in nests of soil or vegetation. The heat may come from the sun, from rotting plant matter, or from the surrounding environment. Adults may guard the nest and later respond when hatchlings call from inside. Many birds sit directly on eggs, transferring body heat in a more controlled way. Some birds, like megapodes, bury eggs in warm mounds and manage the mound rather than brooding in the usual sense. Dinosaur nests appear to include strategies along this broader archosaur spectrum. One clue comes from the arrangement of the eggs themselves. In several oviraptorosaur nests, elongated eggs are positioned in circular or spiral patterns, often paired and angled. The arrangement is too regular to dismiss as accident. It suggests repeated behavior, a body plan interacting with a nest plan. A clutch becomes almost architectural, a pattern left by an animal that never meant to leave a message, yet arranged its eggs so carefully that the design remained after the animal and its world were gone. The famous brooding oviraptorosaurs do not sit like heavy statues crushing what lies beneath them. Their limbs and bodies are placed around the clutch. The eggs often form a ring with open space in the middle. A smaller adult could cover or shade more of the clutch directly. A larger adult might have made less contact, using body position, feathers, partial burial, sunlight, or warm sediment in combination. The details are still studied, and new models continue to refine the picture. Recent experimental and modeling work on oviraptor-style nests has emphasized that incubation may not have been identical to modern bird brooding. An adult could influence nest temperatures without heating every egg evenly. Sunlight, sediment, and body warmth may all have played roles. This kind of conclusion is important because it prevents the past from becoming too familiar too quickly. A feathered theropod near a nest may look bird-like, but its solution may have been a hybrid shaped by size, egg placement, and environment. Picture one of these nests on a late Cretaceous plain. The eggs lie in a ring, their long axes tilted, partly supported by sediment. The adult lowers itself near the center, folding limbs that carry feathers along the arms. Its body casts shade across some eggs, while others remain closer to the warmth of exposed ground. A gust lifts dust from the surface. The animal is not performing for us. It is only doing what its lineage has taught it to do. A storm could end that scene. Sand might move down from a dune face. Mud might flow from a slope after sudden rain. A nesting animal that could have escaped under ordinary circumstances might remain too long, held by instinct, trapped by weight, or simply overtaken too quickly. The fossil later called Big Mama, a Citipati-like oviraptorid preserved over a nest, is powerful because it places an adult in relation to eggs at the moment of burial. That posture cannot tell us everything, but it tells us the adult was not far away. It tells us the nest was active, or recently active. It tells us that the relationship between some dinosaurs and their eggs involved proximity, not just abandonment. In the same way a footprint proves movement without preserving the animal, a brooding fossil proves a body arranged around a clutch without preserving the full reason for staying there. The oviraptor story is also a reminder that names can outlive interpretations. Oviraptor remains egg thief because scientific names are not easily rewritten when a reputation changes. The animal continues to carry an accusation that the fossils no longer support in the old way. There is something fitting about that. Paleontology is full of first impressions corrected by later evidence. The stone does not change. What changes is the way we learn to read it. Another extraordinary record comes from a fossil nicknamed Baby Louie, later associated with the giant Cananithid oviraptorosaur Bebelong. Large eggs known as Macroelongatulithus had been found in Asia and North America, but for a long time their parent was uncertain. The embryo connected at least some of these enormous elongated eggs with giant oviraptorosaurs. Here again, an embryo did what nearby bones alone could not do. It identified a relationship between egg type and dinosaur group. The name Bebelong means baby dragon in a blend of Chinese and English. The animal itself, as an adult, would have been much larger than the small oviraptorids people often imagine. Its eggs were large, elongated, and arranged in a clutch that suggests a massive nest. A baby that could fit inside one of those eggs belonged to a lineage capable of growing into a giant bird-like theropod, an animal with a beak, long legs, arms, feathers, and a presence unlike almost anything alive today. The fossil does not show us the adult walking around the nest. It does not show feeding or guarding. But it places a near-hatching or developing individual inside a reproductive system. It helps attach eggs to bodies, and bodies to ecosystems. This is one of the hardest tasks in dinosaur egg research. Most fossil eggs are classified by the egg itself, using eutaxa, because the shell is often found without an embryo or an adult. The parent may remain unknown even when the nest is beautiful. Eutaxa can sound technical and distant, but they are practical tools. A dinosaur egg may be called by a name based on its shell type rather than the animal that laid it. The shell may have distinctive ornamentation, thickness, pore patterns, or microstructure. That is sometimes all scientists have. A rounded egg in one deposit, an elongated egg in another, a clutch preserved in sandstone, a layer of fragments in a nesting ground. The egg has its own taxonomy because the parent is often missing. In some cases, the absence of the parent is not failure, it is information. A nest with no adult may suggest a strategy that did not involve constant brooding, or it may simply mean the adult left before burial, escaped, decayed elsewhere, or was never preserved. A clutch with an adult is rare enough to feel decisive, but a clutch without one is normal. Most living parents are not preserved with their young. The fossil record makes behavior visible only when coincidence becomes extreme. Sauropod nests present a different scale of reproductive problem. These animals, including titanosaurs in the Cretaceous and earlier long-necked giants in the Jurassic, were so large as adults that direct care of eggs in a bird-like manner would have been difficult. Their eggs, though large by human standards, were tiny compared with the adult. Many clutches contained numerous eggs. In some sauropods, reproductive strategy may have emphasized laying many eggs, with each individual hatchling facing high risk. At titanosaur nesting grounds, including famous deposits in India and Argentina, eggs have been found in large numbers, sometimes suggesting repeated use of broad nesting landscapes. The adults may have come to suitable ground, laid clutches in pits or shallow nests, covered them, and moved through the area in numbers. A nesting colony of giants would leave more than eggs. It would leave trampled ground, compressed sediment, broken vegetation, tracks, dung, and the memory of weight in the rock. The eggs themselves were not the size one might expect from animals that could weigh as much as a small herd of elephants. This mismatch is biological, not mysterious. Shell thickness, gas exchange, and incubation time constrain egg size. A sauropod could not simply lay an egg proportionate to its adult body. The result was a life strategy with an extreme gap between beginning and adulthood. The hatchling had to grow from a relatively small animal into one of the largest bodies the land has ever carried. A newly hatched sauropod may have been independent quickly, at least compared with helpless nestlings in many modern birds. Its limbs had to support it. Its neck had to feed it. Its gut had to begin processing plants. It could not wait in a nest for a parent the size of a building to place food in its mouth. The exact behavior likely varied among sauropods, and direct evidence of parental care is limited, but their anatomy and clutch patterns suggest a different strategy from intensive feeding at a nest. Imagine the edge of a sauropod nesting ground near a river in the dry season. The water has dropped, leaving exposed flats. Adult animals move in from the treeline or across open scrub, their feet sinking into sediment, still firm enough to hold. They do not lower themselves onto nests like birds. They dig, scrape, deposit, cover, and move. The danger is not only predators, it is the adult body itself. One careless step could destroy what another instinct has placed in the ground. Hatchlings emerging from such nests would enter a world of scale beyond their own. A baby sauropod looking across a floodplain would see legs, trunks, shadows, perhaps older juveniles, perhaps no adults at all. The plants around it might be ferns, conifers, cycads, or flowering plants depending on the period. The ground might be dotted with other nests, some successful, some invaded, some abandoned. The first act of life after the shell was to stand in a world that had almost no room for weakness. Eggshell fragments can preserve the aftermath of hatching. A cleanly broken shell may suggest an embryo escaped. Crushed fragments in a nest might indicate movement by hatchlings or later trampling. Weathered shells scattered through sediment may show that a nest was exposed for some time. These details are not always easy to interpret. Shell can break before burial, during burial, after fossilization, or during collection. The shape of damage has to be read with restraint. The baby inside the egg may have used an egg tooth or hard structure to break the shell, as many modern reptiles and birds do, although direct fossil evidence for the soft or temporary hatching tools of dinosaurs is limited. It would have pushed, flexed, and turned. The shell that protected it became the last barrier. Hatching is a struggle even in ordinary life. In deep time, that struggle sometimes ends in freedom, and sometimes in preservation. Some eggs never hatched. They failed early. They were infertile. They dried out. They drowned. They cooled. They overheated. They were buried too deeply. The embryo died before bones could form, leaving only shell. Or it died late, leaving a tiny skeleton inside the egg. A fossil embryo is often a record of failure, and yet it is because of that failure that we can see a stage of dinosaur life usually hidden completely. The hiddenness is part of the subject. Dinosaurs are often imagined from the outside, as silhouettes, skeletons, and track makers. Eggs require imagining the inside of life, membranes, fluid, folded limbs, the gradual mineralization of bone. A nest requires imagining waiting, not action. It is a slower kind of dinosaur story, one measured not in attacks or migrations, but in incubation, growth, and the fragile timing between laying and emergence. Time inside the egg varied among dinosaurs. Some studies of embryonic tooth growth lines have suggested that incubation in non-avian dinosaurs could be slower than in modern birds of comparable egg size, perhaps closer in some ways to reptiles. This has important consequences. A long incubation means a nest remains vulnerable longer. The adult investment increases. The chance of predation, flooding, drought, or temperature failure increases. Reproduction is not only about producing eggs, it is about how long those eggs must survive. A nest exposed for weeks or months becomes part of the landscape. Plants grow around it. Sediment shifts. Tracks cross nearby. Small animals investigate. Insects come and go. Rain may collect in shallow depressions. Sun may heat one side more than another. If the parent stays, it must balance its own need for food and safety with the needs of the clutch. If it leaves, the nest depends more heavily on the environment selected at the beginning. The Mesozoic contained millions upon millions of such nests, most of them erased without trace. Every dinosaur species that persisted had to solve reproduction well enough for the next generation to exist. We see only a fraction. A few eggs in Mongolia, a nesting ground in Montana, titanosaur clutches in India, embryos in China, scattered shells from ancient floodplains. The record is thin, but behind it was an immense, repeated ordinary life. The ordinary life matters because dinosaurs did not dominate the Mesozoic only by being large, armored, fast, or deadly. They dominated it by replacing themselves. Every ecosystem depended on reproduction continuing in season after season. A predator lineage could not survive on teeth alone. A sauropod lineage could not survive on size alone. A hadrosaur herd could not survive on abundance alone. Eggs, nests, hatchlings, and juveniles were not side details. They were the mechanism by which the dinosaur age continued. On a slope in Montana, the ground once held nests spaced apart with a regularity that suggests more than accident. The animals that used them were not small. Maiasaura was a large hadrosaur, a duck-billed dinosaur with strong hind limbs, a deep body, and jaws built for processing plants. Adults could reach several meters in length. Yet the most important fossils from that place are not only the adults, they are the eggs, hatchlings, and juveniles that made the site feel like a breeding ground. The place became known as Egg Mountain, a name that sounds almost too direct until you remember what was found there. Broken shell, nest structures, tiny bones, and larger individuals helped paleontologists think about dinosaur reproduction in a new way. The nests were not isolated curiosities. They appeared close together, and the spacing suggested that adults may have nested near one another in colonies, returning to suitable areas where ground, vegetation, and safety created the right conditions. A hadrosaur nesting colony would have changed the landscape. Adults crossing the same ground again and again would compact sediment. Their bodies would open paths through vegetation. Nesting activity might bring plant material into pits or mounds. Shell fragments would scatter. Young animals would leave tiny tracks if the surface was right. A place like this is not just a fossil locality. It is a former nursery, though a nursery with predators in the distance and storms moving over the plains. The name Maiasaura means good mother lizard, and it shaped public imagination strongly. The idea of a dinosaur caring for its young felt like a reversal of older images, in which dinosaurs were slow, cold, dim creatures ruled by instinct alone. Here was a dinosaur associated with nests and babies, but the name should not make the interpretation too simple. The fossils suggest the possibility of care, but care can take many forms, and the details are still open to careful debate. Some young Maiasaura appear to have had bones that were not fully developed for strong walking immediately after hatching. That has been used to argue that hatchlings may have remained in or near the nest for a time. Broken eggshells in nests have been interpreted as possible evidence that hatchlings moved around after emerging. If the young were not ready to leave immediately, adults or older members of the herd may have played some role in protection, feeding, or at least maintaining a colony environment. Feeding young dinosaurs is harder to prove than guarding eggs. Food does not usually fossilize in the act of being delivered. A beak lowered toward a hatchling leaves no mark in stone unless burial catches the impossible moment. Instead, scientists look for indirect clues: the condition of juvenile bones, nest structure, growth rates, the presence of prey or plant remains, the spacing of nests, and comparison with living animals. Each clue is partial. Together, they can begin to form a cautious picture. In a Maiasaura colony, adults may have brought plant matter near the nests or fed hatchlings directly. They may have guarded the area without individual feeding. They may have returned frequently, but not constantly. The fossil record does not force one modern behavior onto them. What it does suggest is that at least some dinosaurs did more than deposit eggs and disappear. Their young were part of social landscapes, not only isolated clutches left to the weather. The colony itself could have been a defense. In modern animals, nesting in groups can dilute danger. A predator can eat only so much at once. Many adults together can detect threats more easily. Alarm behavior spreads quickly, yet the same colony also attracts attention. The smell of eggs, waste, broken shell, and young animals would not remain hidden. A predator moving along the edge of such a place would know that a generation was beginning there. Hadrosaurs were among the great success stories of the late Cretaceous. Their teeth were arranged in dental batteries, complex surfaces for grinding tough vegetation. Their skulls varied from broad duck-like mouths to elaborate crests in some relatives, crests that may have shaped sound and display. But their success depended as much on young surviving as on adult feeding. A herd without recruitment is only a temporary gathering. The babies were the future of the herd. A hatchling hadrosaur would have entered a world of feet and mouths. Adults cropped vegetation. Juveniles learned movement and probably social signals. The ground trembled when larger animals shifted. The nest walls, if they remained, may have sheltered the smallest bodies from wind or direct sun. The young were not tiny versions of museum mounts. They were growing animals with unfinished bones, changing proportions, and an urgent need to reach safer size. Growth is one of the great hidden facts of dinosaur life. The skeleton in a hall looks fixed, but the animal was never fixed while alive. Bone tissue was laid down, remodeled, stressed, and repaired. Blood vessels passed through growing bone, muscles pulled on attachment sites, teeth erupted and wore down. In young dinosaurs, the record of growth can be especially vivid, because their bones were forming quickly, preserving a pace of life that can be studied long after the flesh is gone. Some dinosaurs grew rapidly enough to reach large sizes in years rather than decades. Others took longer. The pace depended on lineage, body size, environment, food supply, and evolutionary strategy. A fast-growing animal may escape vulnerable size sooner, but needs abundant nutrition. A slower-growing animal may require different protection or face risk for longer. In a nest, these broad evolutionary patterns begin as the smallest daily facts: warmth, food, rest, and survival through another night. Trackways sometimes add movement to the story. A nest shows where eggs were placed. A trackway shows where feet carried a body. Small dinosaur tracks can reveal young animals walking together, moving near adults, or using the same ground as larger individuals. The problem is that track makers are often hard to identify precisely. A footprint preserves shape, not a name. Still, juvenile trackways remind us that young dinosaurs moved through real landscapes, not just nests and bone beds. Imagine a wet margin beside a Cretaceous lake after a storm. The clouds thin, and the surface begins to dry. A small hadrosaur steps across the mud, toes spreading slightly under its weight. Another follows. Farther away, an adult track presses much deeper, the edges collapsed by water. In a few days, the surface may harden. In a few thousand years, it may be buried. In millions of years, someone may see the distance between the prints and wonder whether the young were following. That question is often as close as we get. Were they following a parent? Were they moving with siblings? Were they simply crossing the same mudflat at different times? Paleontology must live with probabilities. It can offer strong evidence in some cases and careful possibility in others. The temptation is to make every baby track into a family scene. The discipline is to let the rocks say only what it can. Not every dinosaur baby needed the same help. Some animals hatch ready to move. Others hatch helpless. Modern birds show an enormous range, from chicks that run soon after drying to nestlings that are blind, naked, and dependent. Crocodilians hatch more capable than many birds, but still benefit from adult protection in some species. Dinosaurs likely included a similar range, shaped by body size, egg size, development time, and ecological pressure. A small theropod hatchling might have been active quickly, relying on speed and hiding. A sauropod hatchling may have needed to leave the nest area and feed on its own almost at once. A hadrosaur hatchling may have remained near a nest longer, depending on the species and interpretation. A ceratopsian baby may have lived among groups where protection came from numbers as it grew. There is no single dinosaur childhood. Juvenile groups appear in the fossil record in several dinosaur lineages. Sometimes young animals of similar size are found together, suggesting that juveniles may have formed groups apart from adults, or that a group died together during a sudden event. The evidence can be difficult to read. A flood can sort bodies by size. A drought can bring many individuals to one place. Predators can accumulate remains. Social behavior and geological process can leave patterns that look similar unless examined closely. Psittacosaurus, an early ceratopsian from the Cretaceous of Asia, has produced fossils that are often discussed in relation to young dinosaurs and possible care. Some specimens preserve many juveniles together, and one famous association of an adult with juveniles has been interpreted cautiously in different ways. Whether it shows direct parental care, a group of young with an older individual, or a preservation event with a more complicated history, it keeps the question alive: how social were some dinosaur young? Protoceratops, also from the Gobi, offers another view of growth and grouping. It was not the giant horned dinosaur that later relatives became, but a sheep-sized herbivore with a beak and frill. Fossils include individuals at different growth stages, from small juveniles to adults. The frill changed as the animal matured, and bone beds of juveniles have suggested that young Protoceratops may have gathered together, whether for protection, social behavior, or because environmental events brought them to the same place. A group of juveniles in life would have been vulnerable, but not helpless. Several sets of eyes can detect movement. Several bodies can confuse a predator. Staying together may help young animals find food, follow paths, or remain near suitable shelter. But a group can also be lost together. A collapsing dune, a sudden flood, or a storm of sand can preserve young lives in one deposit because they failed to escape the same danger. The Gobi Desert has preserved many such moments because its ancient environments included dunes, sandstorms, and rapidly burying sediments. Animals near nests, burrows, or exposed surfaces could be overwhelmed. The same processes that make the fossils beautiful were lethal. A dinosaur curled over eggs, a clutch sealed in sand, juveniles buried together. These are not gentle scenes. They are survival interrupted quickly enough for posture to remain. Yet the Gobi also shows how dry landscapes could be full of reproductive activity. Nests in sandy settings may have used sediment heat and burial. Eggs could be arranged in shallow pits. The surrounding world might have been semi-arid, with seasonal water, scattered vegetation, and animals moving between resource patches. A nest in such a place was a wager against heat, desiccation, wind, and the timing of rain. In wetter environments, the dangers changed. A floodplain nest could be rich in vegetation and close to food, but it could drown. River channels migrate. Seasonal storms tear banks apart. Mud covers surfaces quickly. A nest built too low may be lost to rising water. A nest built too high may dry out. Nest site selection is one of the most important decisions an egg-laying animal makes, even if the decision is instinctive rather than conscious. Some dinosaurs may have returned to traditional nesting grounds for generations, the way many living animals return to rookeries, beaches, colonies, or breeding sites. Repeated nesting can create dense accumulations of eggshell and nest structures. It can also suggest that certain places offered reliable conditions, but repeated use can be hard to prove unless multiple layers, repeated clutches, or strong sedimentological evidence show nesting over time, rather than a single large event. A landscape used for nesting might appear ordinary before the season began. Low vegetation. Open ground. A river in the distance, the calls of pterosaurs overhead. Insects moving through plants. Then, the animals arrive. Adults scrape, dig, arrange, cover, or settle. Eggs collect in patterns. For a brief interval, the place becomes a factory of futures, most of them fragile, most of them unrecorded, all of them necessary. The babies that survived did not remain babies for long in ecological terms. Growth had to be rapid enough to move them beyond the most vulnerable stages. A hatchling that could double or triple in size quickly might leave behind one set of predators while becoming visible to another. Survival was not a single threshold. It was a series of thresholds. Hatch, stand, feed, avoid small predators, avoid larger predators, survive, seasonality, join a group, reach maturity. Dinosaur teeth can sometimes reveal these stages indirectly. Wear patterns show feeding. Replacement rates show how often teeth changed. In hadrosaurs and ceratopsians, complex tooth batteries developed with growth, allowing efficient processing of plants. In young theropods, teeth could be slender and sharp, but feeding strategy may have shifted as skulls and bodies changed. A juvenile predator does not always hunt the same prey as an adult predator. This matters for ecosystems. Dinosaur young were not simply waiting outside the food web until adulthood. They occupied roles of their own. Young herbivores ate plants at lower heights and in smaller quantities. Young predators hunted insects, lizards, mammals, small dinosaurs, or hatchlings. Juveniles competed with different animals than adults did. A dinosaur species was therefore not one ecological presence, but many, changing through growth. A tyrannosaur hatchling, if seen beside an adult, would not look like a smaller version of the same threat. The skull would be more delicate, the body lighter, the prey different. Later in the Cretaceous, young tyrannosaurs may have filled mid-sized predator roles before growing into apex predators. The same principle likely applied broadly. Ontogeny can divide an animal's life into ecological chapters, each one leaving different traces and facing different risks. Nests reveal the beginning of those chapters. Juvenile bones reveal the transitions. Adult skeletons reveal the end result, but not the path. When all three occur in one region or formation, a dinosaur becomes more complete in time. The animal is no longer only a shape, it is a life history, a sequence from egg to hatchling to juvenile to breeding adult. Repeated enough times to leave a lineage behind. This is why the hidden lives of prehistoric families are not sentimental additions to paleontology. They are central to it. Reproduction shapes anatomy, migration, group behavior, growth rate, mortality, and population structure. A dinosaur species with many eggs and little care faces different evolutionary pressures than one with fewer eggs and longer protection. A nesting colony shapes landscape use differently from solitary nesting. Family life leaves consequences even when the family itself is not preserved. A nest is easiest to imagine from the parent's point of view, but predators saw it differently. To a small mammal under the cover of night, a buried clutch might be an opportunity. To a lizard, a snake, or a small theropod, a crack in the shell or a loose edge of sediment could mean food. To insects and other invertebrates, the nest was heat, smell, moisture, and organic matter. The boundary between family life and feeding life was thin. Egg predation is difficult to preserve directly, but it must have been common. Modern eggs are eaten by animals with sharp teeth, blunt jaws, claws, beaks, snouts, and even by animals small enough to enter tiny spaces. Dinosaur eggs would not have been exempt. Shell fragments with unusual damage, nests disturbed before burial, or embryos missing from otherwise intact clutches can raise questions. But the record rarely shows the act clearly. Most stolen eggs leave no fossil behind. The name oviraptor came from the fear of egg theft, and though that particular interpretation changed, egg eating itself did not vanish from the Mesozoic. Some dinosaurs almost certainly ate eggs when they could. So did mammals, crocodiliforms, lizards, snakes in later periods, and perhaps pterosaurs scavenging exposed nesting sites. A breeding ground was a place of beginnings, but also a temporary concentration of protein and calcium. Calcium mattered. Eggshell is a mineral investment. The adult body had to provide the material, drawing from diet and physiology to create a shell strong enough to protect the embryo. In modern birds, calcium demand during egg production can be intense. Fossil dinosaurs preserve clues to this reproductive physiology in special bone tissues in some cases. Medullary bone, known from birds and identified in some non-avian dinosaurs, relates to egg-laying females storing calcium for shell production. Medullary bone is not found in every specimen, and it can be difficult to identify with certainty, but when present, it can reveal that an individual was reproductively active. This kind of evidence is intimate in a different way from a nest. It does not show eggs outside the body. It shows the body preparing to make them. A skeleton becomes linked not only to movement and feeding, but to the production of a clutch. The body of a female dinosaur approaching egg-laying season was under pressure. Nutrients had to be gathered. Calcium had to be mobilized. Eggs developed internally before being laid. In some theropods, the paired arrangement of eggs in nests suggests that 2 eggs may have moved through the reproductive tract at once, one from each oviduct. Unlike the single functional oviduct of most living birds, the nest pattern may therefore preserve anatomy indirectly. A ring of paired eggs on the ground can be read as the shadow of organs that no longer exist. The soft anatomy is gone, but the sequence remains. Egg beside egg. Pair beside pair. A pattern produced by a body, repeated in sediment. That is one of paleontology's quietest strengths. It can sometimes reconstruct what vanished by studying what the vanished parts did to the world around them. Not all dinosaur eggs had the same texture. Some shells were ornamented with ridges, nodes, or subtle patterns. Some were smoother. These textures may have influenced how sediment touched the shell, how moisture moved, or how the shell resisted breakage. They also help scientists classify egg types. A fragment only a few centimeters across can carry enough microscopic structure to connect it to broader groups of eggs found across a region. Egg color has also entered the discussion. Some fossil eggs preserve chemical traces interpreted as pigments, especially in certain theropod eggs. This suggests that at least some non-avian dinosaur eggs may have had colors, or speckling, a feature long associated with birds. But color preservation is exceptional, and it should not be projected across all dinosaurs. Many eggs may have been plain, hidden, buried, or colored in ways we cannot yet detect. For an exposed egg, color can matter. It can camouflage the shell against ground, vegetation, or shadow. It can signal shell strength or condition in some living birds. For buried eggs, color may matter less, because the shell is not meant to be seen. The presence or absence of pigment, therefore, may connect to nest style. A visible egg faces different pressures from one sealed under warm sand. This is where the world around the nest becomes essential. In the Jurassic, many nesting landscapes lacked flowering plants, especially before angiosperms spread later in the Mesozoic. Forests were dominated by conifers, cycads, ginkgos, ferns, and horsetails. By the Cretaceous, flowering plants appeared and diversified, changing understories, food webs, and possibly nesting environments. A nest was always part of a botanical world, and that world changed through time. A hadrosaur, laying eggs among flowering shrubs in the late Cretaceous, was not living in the same plant world as an early sauropodomorph nesting in the Triassic. The ground cover, available nesting material, insect communities, and seasonal rhythms could all differ. Ferns might provide low cover. Conifer needles might accumulate as litter. Rotting vegetation could produce heat. Sandy banks could drain quickly. Clay-rich floodplains could hold moisture, but flood dangerously. The same dinosaur species may have chosen slightly raised ground, open patches, or areas near water for reasons that are not obvious in the fossil. The adult might not think in categories. It might respond to temperature, smell, soil texture, slope, exposure, or the presence of other nesting animals. Instinct can be extremely precise without being conscious. A sea turtle does not need geology to return to a beach. A dinosaur did not need science to choose a nest site. Seasons likely structured many dinosaur breeding cycles. Even in greenhouse worlds without polar ice, seasonality existed. Rainfall shifted, dry seasons came. Day length changed strongly at high latitudes. Plants flushed, slowed, dropped leaves, or produced seeds. Animals moved with resources. A nesting season could be timed so hatchlings emerged when food was available, temperatures were favorable, or floods had passed. In polar regions, the problem became more severe. Dinosaurs lived at high latitudes during parts of the Mesozoic, in places where winter darkness or cool seasons would have shaped behavior. Whether they nested there year-round, migrated, or used seasonal strategies varied by group and region. Evidence from polar dinosaurs shows that the dinosaur world was not uniformly tropical. Eggs and babies in those places would have faced a different set of pressures from those in warm, lowland basins. The idea of a dinosaur parent in darkness is easy to overstate, but it is worth holding carefully. High-latitude summers could be rich with long light. Winters could be dim, cold, or harsh by Mesozoic standards. A nest built at the wrong time might fail. A hatchling emerging too late might face poor food or dangerous temperatures. The calendar was part of the nest, even before calendars existed. Temperature may also have influenced embryonic development directly. In living reptiles, incubation temperature can affect development rate, and in some groups it determines sex. Birds generally use genetic sex determination. For non-avian dinosaurs, the picture remains uncertain. It would be risky to claim that dinosaur sex was determined by nest temperature as a rule. What can be said is simpler. Temperature mattered, because every egg-laying animal's embryo develops within physical limits. A nest too cool slows development or kills it. A nest too hot can be lethal. A nest with strong temperature gradients can produce uneven development within a clutch. Modern experiments and models with dinosaur-style nests help estimate how heat might have moved through eggs, sediment, and adult bodies. These studies do not bring the animal back, but they test which behaviors were physically plausible. The fossil record gives the starting conditions. The lab asks what those conditions could do. How much heat could an adult transfer without crushing eggs? How quickly could a buried clutch warm under sun? How did egg spacing influence temperature? How did shell porosity interact with burial depth? The hidden lives of dinosaur families are not recovered only with brushes and quarries. They are also reconstructed with physics, biology, and comparison. Even so, the nest remains a place of uncertainty. A depression in sediment may be a nest, or it may be a geological feature unless eggs, shell, or structure confirm it. A cluster of eggs may be a clutch laid by one female, or multiple laying events or transported material, depending on context. Shell fragments may belong to hatched eggs, broken eggs, trampled eggs, or eroded eggs. Each interpretation has to pass through sedimentology before it becomes behavior. Sedimentology is the part of the story that keeps the dinosaurs grounded. The grain size matters. The direction of bedding matters. Mud cracks, ripple marks, root traces, ash layers, and channel deposits tell us what kind of place preserved the eggs. A nest in wind-blown sand is not the same as a nest in river mud. A volcanic ash layer can date and seal a surface. A flood deposit can mix remains that were not originally together. The egg is never alone in the rock. It sits inside a history of water, wind, burial, pressure, minerals, erosion, and discovery. By the time it reaches a museum drawer, it has passed through environments no embryo could survive. It has been laid, buried, mineralized, lifted by geology, exposed by erosion, found by someone's eye, and given a number. The private beginning becomes a public object. Museums can make eggs seem calm. They rest in cases under controlled light. Labels give age, locality, and possible parent. The shell looks solid and finished. But every one of those objects began in a landscape with weather. Someone had to find it in a cliff, quarry, badland slope, mine, or construction cut. Someone had to decide whether the curve in the rock was an egg or a stone. Someone had to remove it, without destroying what made it valuable. Fieldwork around eggs is slow because eggshell can be brittle, and clutches can extend into rock in 3 dimensions. A visible egg may be only the upper surface of a larger cluster. Preparation can reveal eggs that were hidden below. Plaster jackets, mapping, photographs, and careful notes preserve context. Without context, an egg loses much of its scientific value. A beautiful object separated from its sediment tells less than a broken shell fragment documented in place. This was one of the lessons of early dinosaur egg discoveries. Fossils collected for display can become scientifically limited if their exact position and association are lost. Modern work tries to preserve the arrangement, not just the specimen. The angle of the eggs, their spacing, whether they are paired, whether shell is crushed inward or outward, whether sediment fills them, whether embryos are present, all of it matters. A clutch is a map. It maps the body of the egg-laying animal, the shape of the nest, the moment of burial, and sometimes the behavior of the adult. The map may be incomplete, distorted, or partly erased, but it is still a map. Reading it requires patience, because the marks are not written for us. They are consequences of life. In some nests, eggs are preserved in multiple layers. This can happen in Oviraptorosaur clutches, where eggs are stacked or arranged in more than one ring. Such arrangements raise questions about laying sequence, nest construction, and adult posture. They also show that some dinosaurs invested effort in organizing eggs rather than simply dropping them randomly. Structure repeats across specimens strongly enough to suggest instinctive patterns. A repeated pattern across many nests is one of the strongest forms of behavioral evidence. One fossil can be an accident. Many similar fossils from related animals begin to show a rule. Oviraptorosaurs laid elongated eggs in organized clutches. Some adults were preserved over them. Some clutches show central gaps. From these observations, scientists can build cautious models of nesting posture and incubation without needing to imagine more than the evidence allows. The caution is important because dinosaur parenting is easy to humanize. A fossil adult over eggs invites words like devotion, sacrifice, and protection. Those words may point towards something real, but they can also carry modern emotion too far into an extinct animal. The better approach is quieter. The adult remained with the nest. The posture resembles brooding. The eggs were arranged in a way that may have reduced crushing. The evidence suggests care, without pretending we know the animal's inner life. That restraint does not make the scene less powerful. It may make it more powerful. A dinosaur does not need human motives to be compelling. Its behavior was shaped by evolution, hormones, sensory cues, and the demands of reproduction. It guarded or warmed or shaded because animals that did so left more descendants. Natural selection can build care without sentiment, and the result can still look intimate when preserved in stone. The intimacy of nests also changes the scale of the Mesozoic. The dinosaur age is often described through continents moving, climates changing, seas rising, predators evolving, and extinctions arriving. All of that is true. But beneath those immense processes were repeated small acts: eggs laid in a hollow, shell forming in a body, a hatchling pushing against a wall, a juvenile taking its first steps across mud. Deep time is not only vast because it contains mountains and oceans, it is vast because it contains ordinary moments repeated beyond counting. Most of them left nothing. A few became fossils, and from those few, a hidden world begins to return. The hidden lives of dinosaur families were not confined to one period. The Triassic gives us early experiments in dinosaur reproduction. The Jurassic gives us the rise of immense bodies and the problem of beginning those bodies in eggs. The Cretaceous gives us some of the richest nesting evidence, from Oviraptorosaurs in Asia to hadrosaurs in North America and titanosaurs on southern continents. The subject crosses the Mesozoic because every dinosaur lineage had to pass through reproduction again and again. A Triassic nesting site carries a different atmosphere from a Cretaceous one. The dinosaurs were newer then, not yet the overwhelming rulers of land ecosystems in the way they would become later. Other reptiles still shared or dominated many ecological roles. An early sauropodomorph laying eggs near a lake or river did so in a world still recovering from older upheavals and moving toward the great transitions that would open the Jurassic. Its eggs were not primitive in any casual sense. They were solutions already shaped by ancestry. Some recent research has raised the possibility that the earliest dinosaur eggs may have been softer or more leathery than the rigid eggshells familiar from many later fossils. This area is still developing, and the record is difficult because soft eggs preserve poorly. But the idea matters because it reminds us that the hard-shelled dinosaur egg may itself have a history. The egg, like the skeleton, evolved. A softer egg would imply different nesting demands. It might need burial in damp sediment, protection from drying, and less direct pressure from an adult body. It would be much less likely to fossilize than a mineralized shell. That means early reproductive history may be more hidden than later history simply because the material was less durable. The absence of eggs in some ancient rocks may not mean the absence of nesting. It may mean the eggs vanished too easily. By the Jurassic, dinosaur communities were larger and more complex. Sauropods moved through forests and floodplains. Theropods tracked prey along river margins. Stegosaurs browsed low plants under conifers. Small ornithischians moved through understory and open ground. Somewhere in all of these ecosystems, eggs were being laid. The Jurassic is famous for giants, but every giant population depended on places where tiny bodies could begin. We do not have the same richness of Jurassic dinosaur nests that we have from some Cretaceous deposits, but the logic of reproduction remains. A Stegosaurus did not appear fully armored from the ground. An Allosaurus did not begin with a skull capable of cutting deep wounds into prey. Diplodocus did not hatch with a neck stretched across the canopy. Their young had to grow through stages that are still poorly known, and each stage faced a different world from the adult. The lack of evidence can be as important as the evidence itself. For many famous dinosaurs, eggs in nests have not been confidently identified. That does not mean they had unusual reproduction. It means preservation, discovery, and identification have not lined up. A museum skeleton may belong to an animal whose eggs are still unknown, even if thousands of eggshell fragments from related animals lie elsewhere under different names. Allosaurus may have guarded nests or may not have. There are possible theropod egg associations in Jurassic rocks, but the evidence is less direct than for the famous Cretaceous brooding oviraptorosaurs. Large theropods faced the same basic problem as other dinosaurs. Offspring started small, and many would have died before adulthood. A young predator had to learn a world of movement, scent, hiding, and opportunity, whether or not adults helped it directly. A carnivorous dinosaur family would not have been gentle, because it was a family. A nest of theropod eggs was still part of a predatory lineage. The hatchlings, once able, would become hunters of smaller animals. Their parents, if present, still needed meat. Around the nest, the world remained dangerous. Family life did not soften the ecosystem. It continued it. The young of large predators may have eaten very different food from adults. A small theropod could chase insects, lizards, mammals, frogs, or tiny hatchlings. It might scavenge scraps. It might hunt near the cover of vegetation, rather than in open confrontations. Its teeth and jaw muscles would not yet match the adult's capacity. In this way, a single predator species could occupy several ecological roles through its lifetime. Herbivorous young also changed their feeding world as they grew. A hatchling sauropod could not reach the same foliage as an adult. It would browse low plants, young shoots, ferns, or soft vegetation near the ground. A juvenile hadrosaur might feed on different plant parts from a full-grown adult with powerful jaws and dental batteries. Growth altered diet, danger, and movement. This creates a Mesozoic world layered by age. The same floodplain might hold eggs under sediment, hatchlings in cover, juveniles in groups, subadults at the edge of herds, and adults towering above them. Fossils often separate these stages because death and burial are uneven, but in life they overlapped. A dinosaur population was not a row of identical adults. It was a moving age structure. Modern animal populations make this obvious. A herd of elephants includes calves, adolescents, adult females, and older individuals. A bird colony includes eggs, chicks, fledglings, and breeding adults. A crocodilian nesting area includes buried eggs, hatchlings, juveniles near water, and adults moving through territories. Dinosaurs likely formed their own versions of these age structures, though the details varied widely. A herd of ceratopsians in the late Cretaceous may have included adults with large horns and frills, younger animals with smaller ornamentation, and juveniles still developing the features that would later signal maturity. A group moving across a coastal plain would be vulnerable at the edges. Smaller individuals might remain closer to the center, or they might form separate groups, depending on species and behavior. Trackways and bone beds can suggest such patterns, but they rarely give the full choreography. Ceratopsian eggs are not as well known as the eggs of some other dinosaur groups. The reproductive record is uneven. Protoceratops was once mistakenly linked to the famous Flaming Cliffs eggs because its bones were common nearby. Later discoveries corrected that. This does not mean ceratopsians were unimportant nesters. It means their eggs are harder to connect confidently, or their nesting sites have not been preserved and recognized in the same way. Somewhere, a horned dinosaur did lay eggs. The adult may have dug into sediment with its limbs or used its body to shape a shallow depression. It may have covered the clutch. It may have moved on. It may have stayed nearby. The fossil record has not yet given us every answer. But the animal's life cycle required the act, whether or not the act has entered stone. Ankylosaurs, too, began in eggs. The adult body was a low fortress of bone plates, spikes, and sometimes a tail club. It is tempting to imagine the young already armored, but armor develops. A hatchling ankylosaur would have carried the beginnings of a defensive future, not the full protection of an adult. Its osteoderms, the bony plates in the skin, would have grown and changed over time. The safest stage was not the first stage. The young of armored dinosaurs may have relied on hiding, low posture, vegetation cover, or group behavior before their defenses became fully effective. Their eggs and nests remain poorly known compared with more famous groups. This absence is not unusual. Dinosaur reproduction is best understood in the lineages where preservation has been generous. For many others, family life remains mostly inferred from growth, anatomy, and relatives. The fossil record is uneven not because ancient life was uneven in importance, but because preservation is selective. A nesting ground in one basin can make one group seem behaviorally rich, while another equally complex group leaves little reproductive evidence. The temptation is to treat what is visible as what was common. Paleontology has to resist that. The best evidence does not always belong to the most typical animal. It belongs to the animal preserved under the right conditions. For the babies themselves, none of this mattered. They did not know they belonged to a group poorly known to science. They knew warmth, hunger, surfaces, shadows, and danger. A hatchling ankylosaur in a Cretaceous forest did not need to be famous. It needed to get through the day. Small dinosaurs may have had very different family lives from giants. A small feathered theropod could make closer contact with eggs. It could hide a nest in vegetation or in a sheltered depression. It could move quickly between feeding and brooding. It could produce eggs that were easier to cover with the body. In some lineages, feathers may have helped regulate temperature, shield eggs from sun, or create a brooding surface. Feathers began for reasons other than flight, including insulation and display. In a nesting context, they may have gained additional functions. A feathered arm spread over a clutch can shade. A body with insulating covering can hold heat. Display feathers may signal maturity before breeding. The evolution of feathers and reproduction are not separate stories. They overlap in the bodies of theropods that eventually gave rise to birds. A brooding oviraptorosaur with feathered arms over eggs has often been compared to a bird, and the comparison is fair if handled carefully. The posture, the clutch arrangement, and the lineage all point toward avian connections. But the animal was not a bird in the modern sense. It lived among non-avian dinosaurs, under Cretaceous skies, in ecosystems with flowering plants expanding and older plant groups still present. It was bird-like because birds inherited from animals like it, not because it was imitating birds. This is one of the quiet reversals that dinosaur nesting fossils provide. We do not look at oviraptorosaurs and say they are almost birds because birds are familiar. We look at birds and realize their nesting bodies carry a history that goes back into non-avian theropods. A bird on a nest is not a small reminder of dinosaurs. It is a dinosaur continuing a behavior with ancient roots. The living connection can be seen in ordinary places. A gull standing over eggs on a coastal flat. An ostrich lowering itself above a scrape in the ground. A rhea male guarding a clutch. A chicken turning eggs beneath its body. These animals are not fossils, but they are descendants. Their behavior is not identical to extinct dinosaurs, yet it belongs to the same great branch of life. The comparison with crocodilians adds another living edge. A crocodile nest is often hidden under vegetation or soil. The mother may guard, listen, uncover the nest, and carry hatchlings in her mouth. This is not bird-like care, but it is archosaur care. Dinosaurs stood between these living reference points in evolutionary terms, and different dinosaur groups may have resembled one side more than the other in different features. When scientists study dinosaur parental care, they are therefore not asking whether dinosaurs were like birds or reptiles in a simple contest. They are asking which traits were inherited, which evolved independently, which were lost, and which depended on ecology. Open nests, covered nests, brooding, guarding, mound incubation, and colonial nesting are all strategies in a broader evolutionary landscape. The word family can be useful, but it can also mislead. Dinosaurs did not form families in one uniform way. Some may have had brief contact between adult and offspring. Some may have guarded eggs but not fed hatchlings. Some may have protected young in groups. Some may have offered no care beyond choosing a good nest site. The hidden lives of prehistoric families were not necessarily warm. They were varied. A good nest site itself can be a form of parental investment. If an adult chooses the right substrate, depth, exposure, and season, the embryo benefits even if the adult never returns. Many living reptiles show this kind of care through placement rather than attendance. It is less visible, but not meaningless. Selection can favor adults that choose better nesting places because their offspring survive more often. For dinosaurs, this kind of investment may have been common among large-bodied species where constant brooding was impractical. A sauropod could invest through number of eggs, nest placement, timing, and perhaps colony choice. A smaller theropod could invest through placement and attendance. A hadrosaur could invest through colonial nesting and possible care of hatchlings. The strategies need not be ranked as better or worse. They were answers to different bodies and different worlds. The scale of dinosaur reproduction becomes almost impossible to hold in mind. For more than 160 million years across every continent, eggs were laid in numbers beyond counting. Some were round, some were long, some were buried, some were exposed, some were guarded by feathered bodies, some were left beneath soil warmed by the sun, some cracked open successfully. Many did not. The fossil record is the smallest remainder of that abundance. A handful of nests in a museum case stands in for vanished seasons on vanished floodplains. A shell fragment under a microscope stands in for a clutch. An embryo stands in for all the embryos that dissolved before fossilization could begin. The evidence is limited, but the life behind it was not. The study of dinosaur eggs has changed because the tools have changed. Early discoveries depended mainly on field observation, preparation, comparison, and the visible shape of the eggs. Those still matter. But today, an egg can be studied without always cutting it open. CT scanning can reveal hidden structures, possible embryos, shell thickness, sediment infill, and the position of bones still buried inside. Technology lets scientists look into a fossil that may have remained sealed since the Cretaceous. A scan is not magic. It produces data that must be interpreted. Mineralized bone and surrounding rock may have similar densities. Cracks can confuse the image. Deformation can shift bones from their original positions. Still, when conditions are right, a scan can show a skull folded against a body, vertebrae curled along a curve, limbs tucked in the last posture of development. The invisible becomes visible without breaking the shell that protected and imprisoned it. Preparation remains delicate work. A fossil egg can be harder in one area and softer in another. The shell may separate from sediment, or it may be fused into it. Tiny bones inside can be thinner than a fingernail and more fragile than the shell around them. Preparators use needles, air scribes, consolidants, microscopes, and patience. The goal is not to make the fossil look dramatic. The goal is to reveal what is there without removing the evidence that explains it. The rock inside an egg can matter as much as the shell. Sediment filling the egg may tell whether it cracked before burial or was invaded later by minerals and water. The orientation of grains can suggest how material entered. The presence of tiny bones in order or scattered apart can indicate whether the embryo remained articulated or decayed before final preservation. Even emptiness is a clue, if it is understood correctly. At a nesting site, mapping begins before removal. Where is each egg? How deep is it? Which direction does it point? Are eggs paired? Is there a central gap? Are there multiple layers? Is the nest cut into older sediment or built above it? Are there root traces, footprints, mud cracks, or signs of flooding? Once a clutch is removed without documentation, some of those questions may never be answerable again. A fossil egg sitting alone in a drawer can still be beautiful, but its original ground is missing. A clutch mapped in place keeps more of its history. The difference is the difference between a word and a sentence. One object can say dinosaur egg. A documented nest can say where, how, and perhaps why. It can connect the parent's body to the sediment and the embryo to the landscape. Eggshell fragments often travel farther than complete eggs. They can be eroded out of nesting surfaces, washed into channels, broken by trampling, or scattered across slopes. A fragment may not look important to anyone expecting a perfect egg, but under a microscope it can become diagnostic. Shell units, pores, ornamentation, and thickness can show what kind of egg it came from, and sometimes what kind of dinosaur likely laid it. In some formations, eggshell fragments are so common in certain layers that they mark repeated nesting activity. A thin horizon of shell and rock can signal a breeding surface, even when whole nests are gone. The pieces are small, but their number matters. The ground itself becomes a record of reproduction. Not every family fossil looks like a mother over eggs. Sometimes it looks like broken shell mixed into ancient soil. Ancient soils, or paleosols, are important because nests were often built on land surfaces. A paleosol can preserve root traces, soil horizons, burrows, carbonate nodules, and chemical signatures of climate. If eggs are found within or on such a surface, they can be placed in a living environment rather than treated as isolated objects. The soil tells whether the area was wet, dry, seasonal, vegetated, stable, or frequently disturbed. A nesting ground is therefore both biological and geological. It was made by animals, but preserved by earth processes. The adult chose a living surface. Later, sediment buried it, groundwater mineralized it, tectonics lifted it, erosion exposed it. A human hand finally uncovered it. The egg passed through a chain of events so long and unlikely that its existence in a laboratory feels almost impossible. Volcanic ash layers can sharpen that chain. Ash can fall over a landscape and create a datable horizon. It can bury surfaces quickly. It can alter soil chemistry. In some fossil beds, ash helps establish the age of the deposit and the timing of events. A nest sealed beneath or within volcanic material may be tied to a specific episode in the region's history. The family life of dinosaurs was not separate from volcanoes, rivers, and climate. A sudden ashfall might destroy eggs by smothering, heating, or poisoning a surface. It might also preserve them. A slow accumulation of ash could become part of the soil. The same material that marks catastrophe in one layer can become background sediment in another. This is why the geological setting has to be read locally. There is no universal meaning of ash, mud, sand, or limestone. Each deposit has its own history. The phrase dinosaur nest can also hide variety. Some nests were true structures. Some were only clutches in pits. Some may have included plant material. Some may have been buried in sediment without an obvious constructed rim. Some fossil egg accumulations may not be nests at all, but transported clutches or reworked eggs. Scientists have to distinguish nesting behavior from the later movement of eggs by water, gravity, erosion, or human collection. Transported eggs can break, roll, or gather in ways that mimic natural clusters. A flood can dislodge eggs from a bank and redeposit them downstream. A slope can collapse and mix shell from multiple nests. The shape of the eggs, their orientation, and the surrounding sediment help separate original nests from accumulations. If eggs are all aligned by current flow, that tells a different story from eggs arranged in paired arcs by an animal. The best fossil nests feel intentional because the pattern survives the noise of geology. Eggs point outward. Pairs repeat. Clutches occupy depressions. Shell fragments lie where hatchlings may have broken free. Adults appear where adults should be if they were attending. These patterns do not make the ancient animal human. They make it legible. Legibility is rare. Most dinosaur reproduction took place beyond our reach. A female laid eggs on a surface that later eroded. Hatchlings walked through mud that later dried and cracked into dust. A juvenile died in a forest where scavengers scattered the bones. A nesting colony thrived for centuries in a basin that left no useful fossils. The Mesozoic is not mostly hidden because it was quiet. It is hidden because preservation is ruthless. This is why each good specimen carries more weight than its size suggests. A single embryo inside an egg can reshape the identity of an egg type. One adult over a nest can change the interpretation of an entire dinosaur group. One nesting colony can shift the discussion of parental care. One bone tissue sample can reveal reproductive status. In paleontology, small evidence can have large consequences when it connects parts of life that were previously separate. The public image of dinosaur eggs often begins with the perfect oval. A row of eggs in a museum, a nest in a display, a shell lit from above. But in the field, eggs may appear as arcs, broken domes, stained patches, or textures in stone. The first challenge is recognizing them. Concretions can look like eggs. Eggs can look like concretions. Weathering can mislead. The phrase eggs are eggs may sound simple, but proving it can require anatomy, microscopy, and context. Some eggs were discovered long before they were understood. Museum collections sometimes hold objects collected as minerals or curiosities that later turn out to be biological. A rounded agate-filled specimen can preserve the shape of an egg even if its surface looks transformed. Collections are not only storage rooms for known answers, they are places where old objects wait for new questions. When an egg becomes filled with minerals, it can lose the softness of its origin and gain a new internal world of crystals. Silica, calcite, iron minerals, and other materials may enter through cracks or pores. The egg changes from biological object to geological object while keeping the outline of biology. The shell may remain as a thin boundary. The inside may become stone, unlike anything the embryo ever touched. This transformation is part of the beauty of fossil eggs. They are not preserved life in a simple sense. They are life translated into rock. The original shell may be partly present, partly replaced, partly coated, partly distorted. The embryo may be gone. The shape remains. The nest remains. Enough survives for the beginning to be recognized. The beginning was never safe. The nest could be invaded by small animals long before hatching. Even an attentive parent could not prevent every loss. An adult oviraptorosaur might deter a predator approaching in daylight, but not a flood. A hadrosaur colony might overwhelm some egg-eaters by numbers, but not disease or bad weather. A sauropod laying many eggs might succeed through abundance, but each egg was individually vulnerable. Predators and scavengers around nests were not villains. They were parents or offspring of their own lineages, feeding themselves and their young. A mammal eating a dinosaur egg in the Cretaceous might carry food back to hidden young. A small theropod taking a hatchling might be feeding its own body toward maturity. Family life in one animal becomes food for family life in another. This is one reason the subject should not be made too soft. Dinosaur babies were not protected by our interest in them. They were part of food webs. Their deaths fed other bodies. Their survival fed the future of their own species. The same nesting ground could hold care, predation, failure, abundance, and indifference at once. Life does not separate these things cleanly. The fossil record occasionally preserves injury in young animals. Healed bones can show that a juvenile survived trauma. Growth interruptions in bone can suggest stress. Tooth marks can show scavenging or predation. These traces are not always tied to nests, but they belong to the same life history. A young dinosaur that hatched successfully still had to survive a landscape full of hazards. Some hazards were small: parasites, insects, infections, dehydration, hunger. Others were large: predators, wildfire, drought, flood, volcanic events, cold snaps, heat waves. A young animal could die from a change in weather before it ever saw a predator. It could fail because it hatched too early or too late. It could starve because plants failed in a dry season. The fossil record rarely preserves the cause, but ecology makes the risk unavoidable. At the same time, young dinosaurs were not only victims. They moved, fed, learned, and grew. A hatchling that survived its first days had already passed through one of the most dangerous filters in life. A juvenile that reached group size may have gained speed, strength, or social protection. Each stage expanded its options. The body became less fragile. The world did not become safe, but it became more negotiable. This is the quiet drama of dinosaur childhood. Not a single battle, not a single chase, a long sequence of ordinary survival. Warm enough, hidden enough, fed enough, fast enough, lucky enough. The animal that later left a large femur in a river deposit once depended on those small enoughs. The adult skeleton in a museum can hide that history because it is so complete and commanding. A mounted hadrosaur seems to stand outside childhood. A sauropod vertebra seems too large to have any connection to an egg. A theropod skull with serrated teeth seems to belong only to predation. But the egg returns all of them to vulnerability. It restores the first chapter. In that first chapter, the dinosaur age becomes less like a procession of giants and more like a living world. Bodies are not only walking across landscapes, they are making replacements, failing, trying again, nesting in colonies, burying eggs, guarding clutches, growing through seasons and changing as they mature. The Mesozoic becomes biological in the deepest sense, not only ancient, but reproductive. There is another way to look at dinosaur eggs. They were the point where the ancient world became temporary. An adult might live for years or decades, but a nest existed for only a season. The shell had a short purpose. It had to endure long enough and then fail at the right moment. If it stayed too strong, the hatchling died inside. If it broke too early, the embryo died outside. Survival depended on timing written into mineral and membrane. That timing was shaped before the egg was laid. The embryo developed to a certain stage inside the adult. The shell formed around it. The egg entered the nest already carrying a schedule, but the schedule was flexible enough to be influenced by warmth and environment. A cool nest could slow the process. A warm nest could speed it. A dry nest could threaten membranes. A flooded nest could end everything. Eggshell is often treated as a protective container, but it was also a controlled weakness. It needed to resist outside pressure better than inside pressure, because the hatchling had to break out. This is true of eggs generally, and the same design problem would have faced dinosaurs. The shell had to preserve life by being strong, then release life by becoming breakable. That balance is one of the most elegant facts in reproduction. A hatchling breaking free did not step into an empty nursery. It entered a world already occupied by fungi, insects, plants, small vertebrates, older juveniles, adults, scavengers, and predators. If the nest was in a colony, it also entered noise and movement. If it was buried, it had to reach the surface. If it was exposed, it had to leave the broken shell before smell and movement drew attention. The first breath of a dinosaur is one of those events paleontology can never hear, but the conditions around it can be reconstructed. Air through shell. A crack. A shift in the body. Sediment above or open sky. The pressure of other eggs nearby. The possibility of an adult shadow. The first contact with a world that had been outside the shell all along. Modern crocodilians sometimes vocalize from inside the egg before hatching, and the mother may respond. Modern birds also communicate in the egg in various ways. Whether non-avian dinosaurs did anything similar is unknown. Soft tissues and sounds do not preserve. It is tempting to imagine peeping from a dinosaur nest, but the evidence cannot yet carry that sound. The safer point is that living relatives show how complex egg stage behavior can be. Behavior can begin before hatching. Embryos move. They position themselves. They respond to conditions. They consume yolk and prepare lungs and limbs. If some theropod embryos adopted bird-like pre-hatching postures, then the boundary between extinct dinosaur and living bird becomes even more detailed. It is not only feathers and bones. It may include developmental behavior hidden inside the egg. A chick turning beneath a shell is not a small event when seen through deep time. It is a living continuation of a developmental choreography that began long before humans watched birds build nests. The movement is private, but evolution is public in its consequences. The body that folds in the egg today carries inherited possibilities older than grasslands, older than many mountain ranges, older than human language. The ancient nest also had a smell, though stone gives us none of it. Damp earth. Plant litter. Warm shell. Waste from adults. Perhaps the musk of reptiles, the dust of dry plains, the resin of conifers, the sourness of decaying vegetation. A nesting colony would have announced itself to any animal with a sensitive nose. A solitary buried clutch might have been harder to find, but not invisible. Smell matters because many egg predators use it. Burial can hide eggs from sight while leaving scent in the ground. Covering a nest may reduce visibility and regulate temperature, but also creates disturbed soil. An attentive adult can deter some predators, but the adult's presence can also reveal location. Every nesting strategy involves trade-offs. There is no perfect nest. In open environments, sun could help warm eggs, but exposure could also overheat them. In shaded forests, temperature might be more stable, but damp conditions could encourage decay or flooding. On sandy banks, drainage might be good, but collapse was possible. On floodplains, soil could be rich and workable, but water was a constant threat. Dinosaurs did not solve reproduction by escaping danger. They solved it by accepting manageable danger often enough for populations to persist. The word success can sound too clean. A successful strategy may still lose most offspring. Many modern animals produce large numbers of eggs because most young do not survive. If sauropods laid many eggs with little direct care, that does not mean each hatchling had good odds. It means the lineage could continue if enough survived. The arithmetic of life can be harsh without being exceptional. For smaller clutch sizes, the investment per egg may be greater. Guarding, brooding, nest maintenance, or feeding young can improve survival, but it costs energy and time. An adult tied to a nest may feed less, become more vulnerable, or lose other mating opportunities. In some living birds, males perform much of the care. In some theropod dinosaurs, patterns of brooding adults and reproductive tissue have been used to explore whether males may have cared for clutches in certain lineages. The possibility of paternal care in some non-avian theropods is fascinating, but it should be presented with care. The evidence is indirect, based on comparisons with living birds, clutch size, and the absence or presence of reproductive bone tissues in particular specimens. It does not mean all dinosaur fathers brooded nests. It means some extinct theropod care systems may have resembled the male-focused incubations seen in certain birds more than once imagined. A male rhea guarding a nest in the modern world may give a partial analogy. So, might an emu? These birds are living dinosaurs with reproductive strategies in which males play major roles. The point is not to turn every oviraptorid into a rhea, but to broaden what seems possible. Dinosaur parenting did not have to follow the familiar mammalian pattern. It emerged from archosaur bodies, not human households. The more we learn, the more dinosaur reproduction looks like a mosaic. Some traits seem bird-like, some seem crocodilian, some may be unique. A ring of eggs, a brooding posture, a buried clutch, a colonial nesting ground, a fast-growing juvenile, a long incubation, a shell with pigments, a shell with high porosity. Each clue is a tile, and the full image remains incomplete. Incomplete does not mean empty. It means the picture has edges still buried. More nests remain in cliffs. More eggs sit unrecognized in collections. More embryos may be hidden inside specimens that have never been scanned. The dinosaur family record is not finished. It is waiting in stone, but also in questions that have only recently become possible to ask. Future discoveries may change the balance again. A new embryo could connect an unknown egg type to a known dinosaur. A nesting ground could show behavior in a group whose reproduction is still mysterious. A better preserved clutch could reveal how a large theropod arranged its eggs. A polar nest could tell us how dinosaurs bred under extreme seasonal light. A microscopic study could refine the difference between buried and open nests. This is why the topic remains alive. The animals are gone, but the evidence is not exhausted. A badlands slope after rain can still expose a shell edge. A museum drawer can still contain a specimen misidentified decades ago. A thin section under a microscope can still reveal a structure no one had noticed. The hidden lives remain hidden only until the next surface breaks open. The title of good parent may fit some dinosaurs better than others, but the deeper truth is that dinosaurs were reproductive animals, not icons. They were not built only for display in halls or for imagination at full adult size. They had breeding seasons. They laid eggs. They failed. They produced too many young for all to survive. They lived in populations, not isolated skeletons. A population has rhythms. Adults reach maturity. They migrate or settle. They compete, mate, lay, guard, abandon, feed, or move on. Young enter the system. Some die. Some grow. The age structure shifts. Drought thins one generation. A favorable season strengthens another. Predators respond to abundance. Plants recover or fail. Reproduction links dinosaur bodies to climate and landscape as directly as feeding does. A dry year could reduce plant growth and weaken herbivores before egg-laying. A stormy season could drown nests. A warm spell could accelerate development. A cold or shaded nest could delay hatching. A volcanic event could cover a breeding ground in ash. These forces did not need to cause extinction to matter. They shaped ordinary survival year by year. For hatchlings, ordinary survival was immense. A small body crossing a few meters of ground might pass through more danger than an adult encountered in a day. A shadow overhead. A small mammal in the brush. A sudden rain channel cutting through the nest. A sibling that fails to hatch. The world was not scaled to the young. The young had to grow into it. Some did. They left juvenile bones in herds, trackways on mudflats, tooth marks from predators they survived or did not, and growth records inside their skeletons. Those that reached adulthood entered the reproductive cycle themselves. The egg became the animal. The animal returned to ground, season, and instinct. The cycle continued until environmental change, competition, chance, or extinction ended it for a lineage. There is something humbling about the fact that the dinosaur age continued through repetition rather than spectacle. The great transformations of the Mesozoic happened because ordinary reproductive cycles succeeded across extraordinary lengths of time. A nest did not need to be dramatic. It needed to work. Enough eggs had to hatch. Enough babies had to live. Enough adults had to return to the cycle. When the asteroid struck at the end of the Cretaceous, it did not only kill adults, it broke reproductive futures. Nests laid in the wrong season failed. Food webs collapsed around young animals. Heat, darkness, acid rain, cold, fire, and the loss of plants reshaped the world into one where most non-avian dinosaurs could not replace themselves. Extinction is not only death, it is the failure of the next generation to arrive. Birds survived, and with them one branch of dinosaur reproduction survived. Eggs continued. Nests continued. Brooding continued. Hatchlings continued. The lineage that passed through the end Cretaceous catastrophe carried forward traits rooted in Mesozoic theropods. Every bird nest is therefore not a reenactment, but a continuation. The dinosaur age did not survive unchanged. It survived narrowed, transformed, feathered, and alive. This does not make a robin the same as Oviraptor, or an ostrich the same as a Cretaceous theropod. Evolution does not preserve the past unchanged, but it does preserve ancestry. The arch of a body over eggs, the turning of embryos, the breaking of shells, the urgency of feeding young, the risk of nests on the ground, these are not separate from dinosaur history. They are part of its living remainder. The connection is strongest when seen quietly. A ground nesting bird in wind. A parent shifting its weight above eggs. A chick tapping from inside the shell. A broken piece of eggshell on grass. The scene is modern, but the deep structure is old. The fossil record does not ask us to imagine dinosaurs as birds. It asks us to understand birds as dinosaurs that continued to nest. Back in the Mesozoic, the skies above nesting grounds held pterosaurs, not modern birds at first, and later early birds alongside them. In Jurassic forests, Archaeopteryx and its relatives were only part of a larger world of feathered theropods, pterosaurs, insects, and conifers. By the Cretaceous, birds diversified while non-avian dinosaurs still nested below. The boundary between dinosaur and bird was not a sudden line in life. It was a branching process. Some non-avian dinosaur nests may have looked more bird-like than others. Some bird nests may preserve behaviors with older dinosaur roots, but the fossil evidence still requires specificity. Oviraptorosaurs are not hadrosaurs. Hadrosaurs are not sauropods. Sauropods are not troodontids. Each group carried its own anatomy into reproduction, and anatomy matters. A sauropod could not fold over eggs like a sparrow. A hadrosaur could not perch above a nest. A giant canagnithid could not heat a clutch exactly like a small songbird. A horned dinosaur with a heavy skull and beak faced different nest-building mechanics from a long-armed theropod. The body sets limits. behavior works within them. This is why reconstructing dinosaur family life begins with bones as much as eggs. Pelvis shape, limb range of motion, body mass, feathers, beak structure, growth rate, and adult size all influence reproductive possibility. A nest without anatomy is incomplete. Anatomy without nests is also incomplete. Together, they make behavior more than a guess. The environment sets another boundary. A dinosaur nesting on an exposed coastal flat dealt with tides, storms, salt spray, and open visibility. One nesting in inland dunes dealt with burial, heat, dryness, and shifting sand. One nesting on a vegetated floodplain dealt with roots, insects, flooding, and soil moisture. One nesting in uplands dealt with slope, drainage, and temperature. The Mesozoic did not offer one stage. It offered many. Picture a coastal plain near the western interior seaway during the late Cretaceous. The air is humid. Low vegetation spreads across damp ground. Far away, waves move in a shallow sea filled with ammonites, fish, marine reptiles, and drifting life. On land, hadrosaurs pass in groups. A nesting site lies above the reach of ordinary water, but not beyond the reach of storms. Every nest there is an argument with the shoreline. Picture a desert margin in Mongolia. Dunes rise and fall. Vegetation gathers near seasonal water. An oviraptorosaur nest sits in sand, eggs arranged in a careful ring. The adult's body shades the center. Wind moves grains across the shell surfaces. A storm builds beyond the cliffs. The same sand that warmed the clutch may also become the sediment that seals it. Picture a southern continent where titanosaurs return to a nesting ground. The adults are immense, but the eggs are scattered in pits across a broad surface. The young, if they hatch, will begin small and exposed beneath a world of giant feet and low vegetation. There may be no parental feeding, only the inheritance of a site chosen well enough. Numbers become protection, but only at the level of the species, not the individual egg. Picture an early Jurassic lakeshore where a small sauropodomorph lays eggs in a world still young in dinosaur terms. The plants are unfamiliar. The air is warm. Other reptiles share the land. The dinosaurs have not yet become the full giants of later ages, yet the act is already ancient in its own time. Egg, ground, warmth, embryo, hatching, the cycle is older than the animals that would later make it famous. These scenes are separated by tens of millions of years, but they are linked by the same problem. How does a body make another body and place it safely enough in the world? Every lineage answered differently. Some answers lasted for a few million years, some lasted longer. One answer, transformed through birds, is still being tested every breeding season. The fossil eggs that remain are therefore not just curiosities, they are pieces of population biology. They help reveal how dinosaurs reproduced, how fast they may have grown, how long they incubated, how they arranged clutches, and how they interacted with landscapes. They also remind us that behavior is not separate from anatomy or geology. It is where anatomy meets a place. A nest is a place where a dinosaur body met the ground in order to make more dinosaurs. That may be the simplest definition, and perhaps the strongest. It strips away romance without removing wonder. The adult did not know the future. The egg did not know the past. The ground held them both for a moment, and in rare cases, held them long enough for us to find. The hidden lives of prehistoric families were not hidden to the animals that lived them. They were ordinary. A mother or father, if those words apply in a given lineage, did not experience itself as evidence of parental care. A hatchling did not experience itself as a scientific data point. The nest was not a mystery. It was a surface, a temperature, a smell, a boundary, a beginning. The mystery belongs to us because we arrive too late. We have bone instead of behavior, eggshell instead of warmth, sediment instead of sound. We ask the rock to answer questions about bodies that moved, guarded, fed, and died before mammals like us had any place in the daylight world. The answers are partial, but they are not silent. They speak through arrangements, through embryos, through broken shells, through bone tissue, through hatchling limbs, through nests spaced across ancient ground, through adults caught over clutches, through the mismatch between giant bodies and modest eggs, through the living birds that still warm shells beneath their bodies. The story is not one fossil. It is a pattern scattered across the Mesozoic. Another part of the hidden story lies in how young dinosaurs may have learned the landscape. Learning does not have to mean teaching in a human sense. It can be as simple as following older animals to food, shelter, water, or safer ground. In species that lived socially, juveniles may have benefited from moving with adults or with other young. In more solitary species, survival may have depended more on inherited behavior and individual exploration. A newly hatched animal does not enter the world with no information. It carries instincts shaped by ancestors. It may know how to orient toward light, dig upward, seek cover, follow movement, peck, bite, or stand. These behaviors are not learned from explanation. They emerge because bodies that performed them survived more often. Dinosaur babies likely carried such inherited programs, though the details would have differed greatly between a sauropod, a hadrosaur, and a small theropod. In some living birds, chicks recognize calls before they hatch. In crocodilians, hatchlings may call from inside the nest. These living examples show that the egg stage can include communication, but the fossil record cannot yet confirm such sounds in non-avian dinosaurs. The safest reconstruction is not sound itself, but the possibility that embryos and hatchlings were behaviorally active before and immediately after hatching, rather than passive objects waiting to become animals. The first days after hatching may have involved absorbing remaining yolk, strengthening limbs, escaping the nest, avoiding exposure, and beginning to feed. A hatchling that emerged too weak could become food quickly. A hatchling that emerged into a sudden storm might never dry or warm properly. In a buried nest, reaching the surface was itself a challenge. The path from shell to open ground could be only centimeters, but to a tiny animal it was a tunnel out of the only world it knew. Imagine a clutch where some eggs hatch before others. One young animal breaks through, pushing shell aside and shifting sediment. Another remains sealed, still developing. A third has failed. The nest is not a single moment. It is a sequence, uneven and vulnerable. If hatchlings emerged over hours or days, predators and environmental conditions could affect each one differently. Even siblings entered the world under slightly different circumstances. Asynchrony like this matters because timing shapes survival. In a nest where all young hatch together, numbers may overwhelm predators briefly or allow a group to leave at once. In a nest where hatching is spread out, early hatchlings may leave before late ones or remain near the nest and increase activity that draws attention. The arrangement of eggs, the distribution of heat, and the behavior of the adult could all influence whether a clutch emerged together or in stages. Once outside, the young animal's senses mattered. Its eyes had to interpret movement and light. Its ears, if sensitive to calls or environmental sound, had to detect threats or group members. Its nose may have guided it toward food or away from danger. Its feet had to read ground in a practical way: soft mud, dry crust, leaf litter, sand, roots, stones. The world was experienced at the height of a hatchling, not at the height of an adult skeleton in a hall. A fern stem that an adult barely noticed could be shelter for a small dinosaur. A footprint left by an adult could be a hollow deep enough to trap water. A root could be a barrier. A fallen branch could be a wall. Scale changes meaning. To understand dinosaur babies, the Mesozoic has to be lowered close to the ground. The ground-level world was busy. Early mammals moved through shadows. Lizards and small reptiles hunted insects. Amphibians stayed close to damp places. Beetles, flies, and other insects worked through dead plants, dung, and exposed tissue. Small theropods searched for prey. A hatchling entered this layer of life before it ever became part of the larger drama of herds and adult predators. For many young dinosaurs, the first ecosystem was the understory. Plants were not passive background. They created cover, food, humidity, shade, and obstacles. In a fern-rich Jurassic setting, a young herbivore might browse low fronds or hide beneath them. In a Cretaceous setting with flowering plants, seedlings and shrubs could provide different food and shelter. Conifer litter might dry into flammable mats or hold moisture under shade. A nesting animal's choice of ground may have depended partly on plant structure. The rise of flowering plants during the Cretaceous may have changed the world that dinosaur babies entered. It did not replace older plant groups everywhere at once, and dinosaurs had long histories with conifers, cycads, ferns, and ginkgos. But angiosperms added new forms of leaves, seeds, fruits, shrubs, and ecological interactions. The baby dinosaurs of the later Cretaceous hatched into plant communities that were changing around them. Insects changed too. Pollinating insects diversified with flowers, and plant-eating insects found new opportunities. More insects could mean more food for small omnivorous or carnivorous dinosaurs, but also more pressure on plants and more activity around nests. The exact links are difficult to prove for any one dinosaur nest, yet the broader ecological shift mattered. Reproduction never happens in isolation from the food web. A hatchling carnivore could find insect prey before it could tackle vertebrates. A small omnivorous dinosaur might feed on seeds, invertebrates, and soft plant parts. A young herbivore might select tender growth unavailable or unimportant to adults. Because direct stomach contents of hatchlings are rare, these reconstructions remain cautious, but they follow the basic ecological principle that small mouths and small bodies use different resources. Juvenile dinosaurs may also have faced competition from animals that adults ignored. A young hadrosaur and a small ornithischian could feed at similar heights. A juvenile theropod and a mammal might hunt overlapping prey at night or in cover. A hatchling sauropod might be large compared with some animals, but still small enough to compete in the low browsing layer. Age created temporary ecological neighborhoods. Predators did not need to be enormous to be dangerous to babies. A small animal with the right teeth could kill a hatchling. A nest raider did not need to challenge an adult sauropod if it arrived when only eggs were present. The most dangerous animals to young dinosaurs may often have been creatures too small to dominate adult dinosaur stories. This reverses the usual scale of Mesozoic danger. For an adult Triceratops, a tiny mammal is irrelevant. For a fresh hatchling, it may be a serious threat. For an adult sauropod, a small theropod is background movement. For a baby sauropod, it may be death. Dinosaur family life forces the food web to be seen from below, where the famous giants are not always the central problem. There were also dangers from adults of the same species. In a nesting colony, trampling could destroy eggs or kill young. Competition for space could crush weaker hatchlings. A herd moving too quickly could leave behind individuals unable to keep up. Modern colonial animals show that dense reproduction creates hazards as well as protection. The crowd is shelter, but it is also pressure. A broken egg in a nest does not tell us whether it opened into life or failed under weight. A tiny bone near an adult track does not tell us whether the young animal was protected or trampled. The evidence can be painfully close and still incomplete. That incompleteness is not a flaw in the story. It is the shape of deep time. What can be said is enough. Dinosaurs laid eggs. Some made organized nests. Some nested in colonies. Some adults stayed close to clutches. Some embryos preserve bird-like details. Some hatchlings may have remained near nests. Some young grew fast, changed shape, and entered different ecological roles as they matured. Across all of this, the dinosaur age was sustained by reproduction as much as by dominance. The hidden lives of prehistoric families were hidden only because the usual evidence of family life is so easily erased. Warmth vanishes. Calls vanish. Guarding vanishes. Feeding vanishes. The smell of a colony vanishes. What remains is shell, bone, sediment, posture, and pattern. And from those remains, the private side of the Mesozoic begins to take form. Even the absence of a nest can tell a kind of story when placed beside the abundance of adult bones. For many dinosaurs, we know the mature skeleton far better than the beginning. We can describe the skull, the teeth, the vertebrae, the hips, the tail, and the footprints, while the eggs remain unidentified. This imbalance is not because birth was less important. It is because beginnings are harder to keep. A full-grown dinosaur could die in a river channel and leave bones large enough to resist destruction. A nest could vanish with one season of erosion. Hatchlings could be eaten whole. Juvenile bones could be scattered or dissolved. The fossil record does not preserve life according to importance. It preserves what passes through the right accidents of burial, chemistry, and time. That makes the known nesting sites even more valuable. They give weight to what is missing elsewhere. When Maiasaura nests show possible colony behavior, they remind us that other herbivores may have had complex breeding lives we have not found. When Oviraptorosaurs show adults over eggs, they remind us that theropod care may have been more varied than old images allowed. When Titanosaur clutches appear in great numbers, they remind us that giant reproduction could be widespread and landscape scale. A single shell fragment on a hillside may therefore point beyond itself. It may mark a nest that has eroded away, a colony surface still buried nearby, or a clutch transported from higher ground. It may belong to a dinosaur whose bones are known from the same formation, or to one not yet discovered there. Small evidence opens larger questions. The safest way to imagine dinosaur family life is not as one scene, but as many overlapping scenes. A feathered adult over eggs in a dry basin. A hadrosaur colony beside a floodplain. A sauropod nesting ground spread across open flats. A juvenile group moving near the edge of vegetation. A hatchling hidden under ferns. A failed embryo sealed in an egg. Each scene is incomplete, but together they make the dinosaur age feel inhabited from the ground up. No single fossil can make all dinosaurs good parents, careless parents, social parents, or solitary parents. The evidence is more interesting than that. It shows range. It shows experiments in care, abandonment, abundance, arrangement, brooding, burial, and growth. Dinosaurs were not locked into one reproductive identity. They were an evolving radiation, and reproduction evolved with them. To follow their nests is to follow a quieter history of the Mesozoic. Not the history of who ruled, but of who returned. Not only who hunted or fed, but who laid, warmed, buried, guarded, hatched, grew, and began again. The egg is small, but it carries the continuity of an entire age. A fossil nest also changes how adult dinosaurs are understood. It takes an animal often defined by its weapons, armor, size, or feeding anatomy and returns it to a life cycle. The same jaws that cropped plants or cut flesh belong to a body that once emerged wet from an egg. The same limbs that crossed floodplains once had to learn balance. The same species that dominated a landscape had to begin as something breakable, dependent on warmth, timing, and a surface chosen before it could choose anything for itself in that ancient world. Near the end, it is worth returning to the egg itself. Not the colony, not the adult, not the herd, not the great extinction, but the single curved object in stone. Its surface may be pitted, its shell may be incomplete, it may rest beside others, or alone in a tray. It is small enough to be overlooked beside a skull, yet it contains a kind of scale that a skull cannot. A skull shows an animal that lived. An egg shows an animal that might have lived. It holds possibility, and sometimes failure, in the same shape. If it hatched, the shell is the remains of a beginning. If it did not, the shell is the remains of an ending before the first breath. Fossil eggs sit between those meanings, and sometimes the rock does not tell us which one is true. The nest around it may be gone, the parent may be unknown, the species may be identified only by shell type, the landscape may be reconstructed from sediment, pollen, plant fossils, and nearby bones. Still, the egg remains. It is enough to say that somewhere in the dinosaur age, an adult body produced it, placed it, and left it to time, warmth, instinct, and chance. The mud dries. The sand shifts. The river changes course. The adults move away, or stay, or return, depending on the animal. Inside the shell, a body develops or fails. Outside, the Mesozoic continues. Plants grow, predators pass, storms gather, seasons turn without names. The egg waits in the only way an egg can wait. Then the scene disappears. Not all at once, but through the ordinary erasures of the world. The nest collapses. The shell breaks. Sediment covers the surface. Minerals enter. Continents move. Mountains rise. Rain cuts into old rock. A fragment appears on a slope under a modern sky. A hand lifts it. A microscope studies it. The beginning of a dinosaur becomes evidence. What survives is not the whole family, and not the whole life. It is a curve of shell, a ring of eggs, a cluster of tiny bones, an adult posture, a surface of ancient ground. Enough to show that the age of dinosaurs was not only an age of giants, it was an age of nests. It was an age of hatchlings. It was an age of vulnerable beginnings repeated until the world itself changed. A bird settles over eggs today, lowering its body with small adjustments of weight and feather. The shell beneath it is warm. The embryo inside is hidden. Nothing about the moment looks like deep time at first, but the old pattern is there, alive and breathing, carried forward from animals that nested under Mesozoic skies. In a museum drawer, the fossil egg remains still. In the Badlands, more fragments weather from the slope. In the stone, a nest keeps its arrangement after the parents, the babies, the plants, the rivers, and the climate have vanished. The shell is broken, but not empty. It holds the outline of a world where even the greatest dinosaurs began in silence, under a layer of warmth, waiting for the first crack of light.